You are listening to the Football Diehards podcast with your hosts, Justin Lanero and Bob Harris, sponsored by DraftKings. Sign up now using promo code DIEHARDS, DIEHARDS. Make a first-time $5 deposit, and you'll receive a free $3 ticket.
Welcome, everyone, back to the Football Diehards podcast. I am, I guess, your only host or your only co-host, along with Bob Harris. You can find me at Kyle Tweets here. Find him at Football Diehard. No Justin tonight. I believe what he told us was he was consulting with, I'm going to guess the Irish Mafia on a fantasy draft of some sorts. Somewhere north of, I would say, 8 figures they said were at play. So if Justin comes back unable to type, he's fingerless. They've removed them for missing out on another great breakout quarterback. You know, we know what happened. But good luck to Justin on his draft tonight. You are just rolling with me and Bob. Bob, how's it going? I am almost surprised that we are getting football given the craziness of the offseason, but that doesn't mean I'm not incredibly excited.
I'm so damn stoked. As you know, I've been purporting all along that this was what was going to happen, not because I knew it was going to happen, just because I knew the league was dead set on making it happen. And to their credit, man, the COVID numbers, they just released the new testing and, they've kept it down. Kudos not just to the league, for having the protocols in place, and they've gone to great lengths, whether it's the contact tracing. I mean, everyone's walking around with GPS. It's just like on the field where they have the chip in their shoulder pad, and so we know what all the next gen stats are. They know everyone they talk to and who they're around and who they're within 6 feet of, but all the testing, everything. But credit to the players, right, for, being responsible. Look, that's part of this whole equation, and I've seen a lot of players talk about it on Twitter. You've heard them mention it, if you've seen snippets of people talking, maybe a little bit on HBO's Hard Knocks, that, they realize that some of this is on them. So a little personal responsibility goes a long way, something we could all remember, and that we should all take into account as we're trying to work through these troubled times. And here we are, about a day away from football, almost exactly. We're about 23 hours away. So fantastic stuff. I'm glad to be here. Got a little news we'll kind of roll through to get us started, Kyle. The injury report for the Thursday night game. Brandon Cook's the only player of interest on there. A little worrisome. This is a hamstring issue for him. He is questionable. The concussions have been what we're worried about with him. Let's say Brandon Cooks does not go. Is there anyone else you're willing to pivot to? Obviously, everyone's playing Will Fuller, but does Kenny Stills rise up the radar a little bit for you if there is no Brandon Cooks?
Yeah, man, I feel like that was a question you posed to me as a trap last season, and I fell for it. And I won't be falling for it again. I mean, he was the quintessential, chalk bust last year when Will Fuller went down. It was like, oh, he's basically discount Will Fuller. Let's get him in the lineup. And he did nothing so many times. And the times he did do stuff, it wasn't when Will Fuller was down. I think it was like that, they played on the Monday doubleheader, and I think he scored that night or something. So I probably look to Randall Cobb. I think Cobb has already maybe an established role. Just he's the one guy who's not a specific deep threat. And underrated, Cobb, I believe, got exactly 83 targets last year in maybe the best, at least a good argument for the best wide receiver tandem. He was playing as the third wheel, but still got his in some ways. So I think when you get targets compared to guys who should be getting a lot of targets and you still get your own, you get yours, that's impressive to me. So I think in a scenario where he doesn't have that receiver talent around him, he's going to get more targets. He would be the guy I would pivot to. I'd also be interested in maybe they get Duke Johnson. I don't want to perpetuate this is the year Duke Johnson gets worked out as a wide receiver, but he could be a guy they could get on 2-back sets. You can make the same argument for David Johnson that he makes sense as a receiver, and we saw it was his peak season. I believe he had the highest ADOT for a running back in the history of average step to the target. And I'm not sure if that version of David Johnson exists anymore, but he's a guy I think is worth considering. I'm just going to pivot to Duke Johnson because David Johnson has disappointed me too many times in the last, and Randall Cobb. But of course, let's start at the top. Will Fuller, as you mentioned, my money printing machine is going to be going crazy with Will Fuller. Dude, he's healthy. He is a number one receiver, and we saw even in college he was capable of being a number one receiver. You just don't get that opportunity when you happen to play next to DeAndre Hopkins. So he's a guy that I think, especially for my teams, I was taking a lot of receivers before I got Will Fuller, another receiver. And I'm jumping him ahead of some of my mid-round receivers. A guy like, I could see myself playing him ahead of a Jarvis Landry or Marquise Brown, because I'm head over heels in this specific matchup, especially against a team that's going to put up points in droves. So I love Will Fuller. I think he is like one of the easiest starts. And if Brandon Cooks is out, I mean, it's free money, baby.
TLDR, not Stills. So Will Fuller, I mean, we share similar views on this, a potential league winner where he's been getting drafted. Although the last couple drafts I've been in, he's moved up into that 5th round range where I'm thinking, wow, that's kind of a little steeper than I want. I mean, I like him and he's going to be great, but what if so anyhow, so I hope you all got him at a much more reasonable price than 5th round, as Kyle and I did in many drafts, and I'm on board with you, man. I think that, and look, the over-under on this game is what, 3,000? No, it's what, 50,
56, 56 and a half.
56? Yeah.
I think somewhere in that range.
I mean, I feel like either team could hit the over.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the games. It feels like we saw this with a handful of games, actually. I believe it was 2 years ago that really stick out to me, was like Kansas City versus, I think they played like the Rams, Kansas City versus New England late in the season, and then like Rams Saints. Sometimes I get the over as high, but I'm going to keep mashing that button. And I especially apply that to how I build my DFS lineups, how I build even my season, make my start sit decisions. So for me, yeah, I love the potential for points in this game. The total is just incredible, highest of the week by a significant margin. I'm getting like every ancillary piece I can on my rosters. If I know you have to spend that money anyways, but Clyde Edwards-Helaire, I'm fine with him being my number one running back on the week. Even like Mecole Hardman, Sammy Watkins, if I went super heavy on running backs, those are guys I think have outside touchdown potential, because we're going to see Patrick Mahomes throw, as you said, 40, 50, 60 touchdowns in this game.
At least. Well, look, we saw a 51-7 run by the Chiefs in the championship game, right? So, I mean, it's like, the Chiefs are capable of putting up some big points. By the way, I screwed up already in this program. It was a quadriceps injury for Brandon Cooks, not the hamstring. We'll leave that for Will Fuller's future, or not. Speaking of hamstrings, Miles Sanders, on the practice field. Jalen Reagor also working on a limited basis. The initial reporting would have been that that he's unlikely to play this week. It seems like he now has an outside chance. Alshon Jeffrey not practicing. How are you dealing with this offense this week, for this game?
Yeah, I mean, Philly, it is incredible what they do to sabotage their own talent somehow. Again, every single freaking season they enter the year with injuries and they come out with even more. So I would be, I guess maybe not shocked at this point. It seems like, did Jalen Reagor log a full practice? I know the initial report was that,
it was limited.
So the beat reporter said like, this is what a full practice looks like. So I think they're probably, I don't know, they're really ramping him up to play, even if they call him limited. I would still lean that he doesn't play, or if he does, it is on, the pitch count of all pitch counts. It's actually it's very similar to what we saw with Marquise Brown last year. And look how that worked out. And I don't mean to say that that's what we're going to see from Jalen Reagor, but he is a guy who I thought had that playmaking ability, that maybe he only needs 15, 20 snaps to make it happen. And especially if those snaps are just like, we're never going to put him in on a running play. You'll never see him in on a running play. You'll never see him in on a screen play to Boston Scott. You're going to see him in on a play where he's the first or second read. So maybe that's how they choose to use him if he is healthy. I'd still kind of be surprised if he ends up playing. Would be a bit surprising given the extent of his injury. Was supposed to keep him out for at least like 2 weeks when that first diagnosis came in.
There was some reporting earlier this week. John Clark from NBC Sports in Philly suggested that he looked like he might be on a week 2 path. Which is still pretty much on the good end of what the expected range of outcomes was. Sanders, on the other hand, seemed like they've been keeping him bubble wrapped just as a precaution. Also limited today, but maybe a little less so.
Yeah, he better be healthy, man, because one of my highest owned first round picks. I don't have nearly the exposure I have to first round picks in general, because I don't want my entire season to rest on Miles Sanders' hamstring. But I do think when you see guys do what he did in his rookie season, goes over, I believe, 800 on the ground and 500 through the air, the guys that do that the list is just studs. It is just studs. Most recently, I believe Alvin Kamara and Saquon Barkley both hit the 500 threshold. When you see a guy, especially that receiving game, as a rookie, an explosive playmaker, they are going to continue to do that year in and year out. I believe in Miles Sanders, both in his draft pedigree, in what he did at Penn State, and then going forward, he showed me nothing to talk me off the ledge as a rookie. I am concerned with both this offensive line that is just getting pummeled by injuries throughout the offseason and Sanders himself, although it does seem his injury seems that they at least pulled him out of training camp. I don't want to say exclusively as a precaution, but mostly as a you've been in the system long enough. You got some reps in training camp. Let's not run any risk of furthering this injury. As you said, they're putting him in bubble wrap. They're not putting him on IR, I guess is how you would say it, especially with IR only being 3 weeks mandatory now.
Yeah, they're playing the Washington football team. We're talking about the committee approach at running back just to, clue everyone in. And I know J.D. McKissick is listed as starter. Ron Rivera, kind of went on the record, said, it's just a mishmash of guys, and however it plays out is however it plays out. We all have high hopes for Antonio Gibson. I suspect it would be wise to give that a week. Kyle, are you going to give it a week?
A lot of my teams can't afford to give it a week. Because I usually,
I know.
I love, you know me, I love me.
This is why I asked.
Baby. So I think at least I feel okay with him having, I'm going to call it like a 4 or 5 target floor. Although, J.D. McKissick being listed as a starter, he's a guy who also catches passes pretty well. That's really the only thing he does at an NFL level. That's his role. But I would still anticipate that, especially in a game where you could see Washington throwing a lot, as they tend to lose games pretty often, I would think Gibson has a floor of, I'm only going to call it 6 or 7 carries, but probably 4 or 5 targets. That's, 3 receptions. Reasonably, I think it is a low end of 3 receptions. So I think he gives you a fair enough floor to play him in week 1. He's not giving you the same floor as other players who are now going in the same range. I think, the floor on a guy going probably around the same range, David Johnson, I know he's creeped up in drafts a bit, but man, Antonio Gibson has skyrocketed up drafts. Probably has a higher floor. I would say his floor looks more like a Duke Johnson, which you can get a bunch of rounds later, but his upside is that he comes into a team with 300, I believe they have over 300 vacated carries and over 100 vacated running back targets. So I think the upside is there, and the floor is enough that I'm willing to bet on him as a week one start. I don't know though in we'll talk about it later in DFS. He's a guy who I do think has an out to an 8-point game. And when you get a guy, even though I think he's like 4K, when you get a guy who has an 8-point game and he is like 20% owned, he's 18% owned. I know we're not talking about DFS, but that is a guy when that is so firmly in his range of outcomes, and I think you could even call it 7-6-point game. When that is so firmly in his range of outcomes in DFS, I think it's fine to fade him. If you have him on your roster and he's your second or third running back, maybe he's my first running back in some places. You're probably playing him though.
The Miami Dolphins traveling to New England to take on the Cam Newton-led Patriots. Curiosity factor is great here. The Patriots backfield, a convoluted mess once again. Damian Harris on IR, that 3-week absence all but certain. Sony Michel going to be eased in. How much Rex Burkhead do we see?
Oh, baby, that is the question of all questions. I have asked that every week for the past 4.5 years. No, I think we see a fair amount of Rex Burkhead. Everything coming out of Patriots camp is that Sony Michel is going to be eased back in. And I think that makes sense for them to do with a former first-round pick who has really struggled with injuries dating back to his time in college. So I think that would make a lot of sense. And I think they should be able to. They should, in all scenarios, probably beat up pretty handily on Miami. They have, I know their defense lost some guys to opt-outs, but they still have probably one of, if not the best secondaries in the league, led by Stephon Gilmore, who probably ends up shutting down a nicked up Devontae Parker. So for me, especially when you see them, when they enter the fourth quarter with a 14-point lead, that's probably when you see a lot of Rex Burkhead. And I do think that is the downside, that Sony Michel doesn't catch passes. And if he doesn't end up falling into the end zone, that you just end up with, even if he has a really good game, like a 14 for 70, 80 yards, if he doesn't catch a single pass, which is probably his projection has to be one catch. If he doesn't catch any passes, you just end up with a 5, 6, 7-point game in which things broke his way, other than the fact that he didn't score. They get up early, that's what you want from a guy. But when you don't have that, garbage time or just grinding out a positive game script upside, because I do think that Rex Burkhead would get to play some of that role, I can't be starting him. I can't, and I won't do it.
I'm with you, man. You mentioned Devontae Parker dealing with a minor hamstring tweak. Mike Gesicki has a glute issue. Preston Williams limited coming off the knee. Seems like all of them will play, but you mentioned very tough matchup. Although Devontae Parker did hand Stephon Gilmore his hat in the second game last season, so we'll see how that goes. Green Bay, Minnesota, no Danielle Hunter. He went on IR, so interesting there. Indianapolis, Jacksonville. James Robinson is your starting running back there. Is he cheap enough for you?
Yeah, I think I'm not confident, especially because they signed Dare Ogunbowale. I think they have two running backs who are going to basically take 90 to 100% of the backfield targets. And for a team like Jacksonville that is projected to lose handily to Indianapolis, I don't want a guy who has a single between the tackles role, despite the fact that, I think if you had been following me on Twitter, if you had been listening to me on podcasts, you would have yourself a lot of James Robinson. He's a guy who, despite, he played in FCS school, so it makes sense that he would beat up his opponents, but God, he murdered them. He went for, I think it was
4,400 yards, 46 touchdowns. Oh my God.
1,900 yards, 364 carries, I believe. And I only say I believe because I have those numbers memorized. Like, I don't need to look them up anymore because the dude is such a legit baller. And when you see a guy just dominate his competition at a lower level, I think there's reason to believe he would at least compete at higher and higher and higher levels. So I think he's a guy that he's the number one waiver priority by a wide margin. With Divine Ozigbo, their actions tell me he's not going to be playing in a near health capacity in week one.
Dealing with a hamstring issue currently at this moment. Raquel Armstead on the COVID and reserve COVID list. Devonta Freeman sent home packing. After a brief visit over the weekend in which his demands for money still too great. You'd think he'd notice what everyone else was getting paid, but maybe not. On the other side of the ball, Jonathan Taylor season starts officially Sunday. Good luck with that, people. I intend to enjoy it with you. And by Jonathan Taylor season, I mean Marlon Mack's still there, and I don't know, but I'm counting on Jonathan Taylor an awful lot. Chicago against Detroit. David Montgomery also limited. The wide range of limiteds comes into play here, as we heard earlier. Jalen Reagor looking like he had a full practice. Montgomery looking like he stretched and did individual drills. No teamwork. So, looks like Ryan Nall's heading for his start. They'll probably see a little more Tariq Cohen, not between the tackles, maybe a dash of Cordero Patterson, assuming he's healthy, also limited, today or Wednesday. So in Detroit, DeAndre Swift limited, Kenny Golladay limited, Danny Amendola limited. Is this a game that you find appealing in any way?
So I find one of these teams appealing. I find Detroit, led by Matthew Stafford, who through 8 games was like a borderline MVP caliber passer, was on pace to go just under 5,040 touchdowns, not 5,040 touchdowns, 5,040 yards and 40 touchdowns.
That's a lot.
But 5,040 is a Patrick Mahomes-like number, and although Matthew Stafford was good, 5,000 yards, 40 touchdowns, he was on pace to just miss both of those marks. He was, incredible. He was doing things that we had hardly even seen Stafford do. He has one, I believe, 5,000 yard season on his resume so far. Only a handful of those, right around a dozen in the NFL. Last year was about to put his name on that list again, or at least was halfway there, and falls just short by not playing a single game after week 8 with, I believe, a back injury. So he's a guy that I think this offense is super exciting, but the exact opposite happens to be the case on the opposite side of the ball with Chicago. I just can't find myself going in DFS going all in. If I have Lions players, I am certainly trying to get them onto my starting roster, but I'm not super excited about stacking this game in DFS. Allen Robinson is great. Outside of that, I'm just not sure why you want to bet on a team led by Mitchell Trubisky.
I'm with you there. And Allen Robinson is the one play. The Las Vegas Raiders traveling to Carolina to face the Panthers. The Raiders have some nicked up guys, but we're listing Henry Ruggs III and Bryan Edwards as starters in this offense. Hunter Renfrow working the slot. There are other options there. Nelson Aguilar, the great one. Zay Jones, Darren Waller, all kinds of people, in the mix there. But the rookies are kind of interest, right?
They're very much of interest, and they're two kind of almost polar opposite players, a dichotomy of how you want to view rookies. Bryan Edwards doesn't put up crazy numbers at college because he played at a kind of lacking offense in South Carolina, but has over a 90th percentile college dominator, meaning the amount of offensive production he controlled relative to his teammates and relative to the total offense we saw at his college team was incredible. Few players do that. the youngest ever breakout age, as far as I know, I believe under 18. These are things that heavily predict NFL success. Henry Ruggs, on the other end of the spectrum, has all of the intangibles, the 4.27 speed, and when you look at his college production, he hardly even, if at all, broke out. Depending on what your threshold is, he didn't break out. But you can make excuses for him. He was playing with probably at least 2 first-round picks on his own college roster, so you can just say that, yeah, he was a guy who got the ball in his hands, and he was electric on every touch. He just didn't happen to get a lot of touches. So sort of going from both ends of the spectrum, and I actually like both. Of course, I'm more partial to Brian Edwards. I like the data-driven approach in finding breakouts, but I do think Henry Ruggs, when you give a guy with his speed the ball, especially on a team that they don't have many other options, I think they have a lot of 1B style options. I think Darren Waller, very few tight ends can really control the bulk of their offense. I'm not sure if Darren Waller reaches that for me. Hunter Renfrow, just a slot receiver. Josh Jacobs not giving you much as a pass catcher. I think he could end up being a sort of 1A player to a lot of talented 1Bs. And this is a game, 2 offenses, one in Derek Carr and the Raiders, that they have weapons. And Derek Carr is, I would say, a modestly successful, at least he was last year, dink and dunk passer. I think he had an above average completion percentage over expectation, meaning that based on the depth of target, he was good at those depths of targets, better than average. And on the other side, what a turnaround for a team, or what a potential turnaround with the Joe Brady-led offense, Teddy Bridgewater under center, another Derek Carr type player, but I think doesn't get quite enough credit as being efficient, especially we saw last year on the few deep ball attempts he had. He was successful at them. I think he has one of the most interesting set of weapons, so many versatile weapons. DJ Moore, built like a tall running back, got runs got one of the better rushing seasons for a rookie receiver 2 years ago, and then you see last year just goes out and balls out as receiver. Curtis Samuel, a super interesting gadget play who scored at a very high rate. He hasn't been a great fantasy asset, but he has put up a lot of touchdowns. And obviously, maybe the GOAT running back for fantasy purposes, Christian McCaffrey. We talk about DJ Moore, built like a running back. Christian McCaffrey actually puts up the numbers of a receiver and obviously a number 1 running back. This is a game that I'm at least looking to stack in DFS. I could see if you didn't have the receiver depth, you could get, Henry Ruggs in your final flex spot.
Yeah, I'm with you there. New York Jets will be traveling to Buffalo, where the Bills have a little bit of an issue in their backfield. Not an issue. They've got extra backs, or maybe they don't. We'll find out. Devin Singletary, Zach Moss, that's been the talk of the summer with Singletary. A little discussion about his ball security problems. Zach Moss has looked like everything everyone expected, but more. On the other side of the ball, the New York Jets, maybe Le'Veon Bell will catch more passes, but he might have to compete with all the receivers. Everyone's practicing fully. That includes Rashad Perriman and Denzel Mims. Can't imagine Mims, Kyle, doing much. This is his first week of practice, basically, but they are working fully. Any optimism for either of those deep threats in New York's offense early on?
Nope, I don't want any part of the Jets. Sam Darnold through 2 years has been at best by some metrics like a middling passer. By most metrics, though, he's been below average. He's a guy who I wasn't high on out of college, so my prior wasn't strong on him coming out of college, and then he didn't show anything to defy my expectations through 2 seasons. And sure, he's been on a team that lacked talent, a team that I've not been a fan of their coaching staff, but I don't like Adam Gase. I don't think he's a guy who's going to lift up an offense. Maybe he's competent enough to have good players and let them do their thing. I don't think Sam Darnold is that guy, and I do think these weapons around him, Denzel Mims, despite, having an athletic profile, getting no camp as a rookie and then coming in, I just can't find a way to project him to do well in week 1. And Rashad Perriman, despite a good ending to last year, was basically a bust for the rest of his career. I mean, absolutely a bust for the rest of his career. If you only have 2 games that aren't a bust, I'm still calling you a bust. So I'm completely out on this Jets offense until they show me that they can put up fantasy points for multiple weeks on end, because I just won't believe it after 1 week even.
It's hard to buy into this offense. They were so unproductive last year. I'm hoping Sam Darnold sees no ghosts this season. That's about the best I'm hoping for. The Cleveland Browns travel to Baltimore. We're all eager to see how this rushing attack for the Ravens plays out. J.K. Dobbins listed as the 4th receiver or 4th running back on the depth chart. He's not. You'll see that with depth charts. The Cleveland Browns, though, inexplicably to me, and probably to Nick Chubb, signed Kareem Hunt to a 2-year extension this week. What the hell, Kyle?
I don't know. I don't know if this joke is going to land for anyone, but This is basically the Nick Chubb, or at least the Kareem Hunt was just the Tesla. He was just speculation. People were like, the upside's going to hit, baby. He's going to turn into a 3-down back. He's going to be the electric car seller of the world. And then he signs the extension and his stock falls by 20%. So I don't know. This seems absurd to me, a very strange way to build a roster. It seems like they are set to maybe have a decision to make. How do they both keep Chubb when his contract comes up and have Kareem Hunt on this extension? I'm not sure what they're doing. This does tell me that maybe they want to get Kareem Hunt more involved. We saw him get basically like an equal split of targets and rushes last year. You have to get a bit more concerned on the long-term outlooks over these next 3 years for Nick Chubb as a 3-down back. Does he just turn into Chris Carson maybe, which is good, but it's not you spending a 1-2 turn in season-long drafts, let alone dynasty drafts. So for me, Nick Chubb, this has to be a point where you consider what you're doing with him. And Kareem Hunt, sorry for the speculators on Kareem Hunt there.
Too good of a back is Nick Chubb to be relegated, it seems to me. And I talked to Mary Kay Cabot of the Cleveland Plain Dealer over the weekend, and she says, man, she's seen Kareem Hunt almost exclusively in practice, splitting out wide, has not seen him carry the ball a lot. So will be interesting to see what goes on there. By the way, Lamar Jackson, he's really good. He plays for the Ravens. You'll want to watch him if you get a chance. The Seattle Seahawks traveling to Atlanta. Everyone seems to be in relatively good health there. Todd Gurley makes his Falcons debut. Russell Wilson, will he cook with a pair of frontline receivers? Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf have been the apple of everyone's eyes. The Chargers taking on the Cincinnati Bengals. I like this matchup kind of for the Chargers a little bit, and Tyrod Taylor. Call me crazy, or go ahead, say I'm really smart, Kyle.
Yeah, I think this is one of the most anticipated for me matchups. I think we're going to learn a lot about both of these teams. Tyrod Taylor, a guy who doesn't necessarily team with offensive upside for two reasons. One, he's generally a guy who I think gets a moniker as a conservative quarterback. Some of that, sure, warranted, but I know we saw in his one Pro Bowl season with the Bills, he was a well above average deep ball thrower. So I think some of that moniker that he gets as just a game manager is maybe a bit underdeserved. But the one thing that we can count on him doing is rushing the ball, which is great for Tyrod Taylor. That's what you want, the Konami code from your fantasy quarterbacks, but that does convert a select few amount of dropbacks into rushes. That is essentially targets he ends up stealing from Austin Eckler, from Keenan Allen. I do think the likely absence or very limited presence of Mike Williams is enough to buoy that for these guys. But the one interesting thing is Mike Williams, like, if Hunter Henry goes down, I'm like, oh, well, he operates in a very similar section of the field to Keenan Allen. You can say Keenan Allen is going to be a massive beneficiary. Hunter Henry, Keenan Allen, and Austin Eckler all operate short. Mike Williams was the one different player. Maybe Joe Reed steps in that role, but I can't feel any amount of confidence in saying that. So there's a lot of great weapons for Tyrod Taylor, but for me, I just think this offense is going to be so sapped by not only his general conservative nature, but more importantly, just how many targets he ends up taking away by rushing. On the other side, I'm so excited to see what Joe Burrow can do with this cast of weapons.
I am too, man.
Like,
I gotta say, we've
gotten lucky, fortunate. Maybe the NFL is changing in the way they evaluate things. We have gotten a string of the next great quarterbacks are here. Like, we know that the next great quarterbacks are here. And I think Joe Burrow's final season in college says he has a chance to join the guys like, not going to call him Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes. He has a chance to join the tier of, Carson Wentz, Dak Prescott, these kinds of guys, even Deshaun Watson in his rookie season. The offensive line making a bit of improvements, getting more healthy this year. But really what I'm looking at is receiving weapons. I think Joe Mixon has the potential to be one of the better receiving backs in the league. But you look at AJ Green in his prime, a top 5, maybe even a top 3 receiver at his absolute peak. I think Tyler Boyd is one of the better slot receivers in the league. I think his career, kind of looks on that Keenan Allen trajectory, especially when you think about his career has kind of slowed down early injuries, but then he picks it up and just finds this consistent role that he just hammers out targets every week, every season. So I think he kind of has that to his game. Then, of course, you put a guy like John Ross on the outside, if healthy, the fastest player in the league by 40 time. So for me, this is a game that we look at the Jets-Bills game. I would be shocked if the Millie Maker winner this week on DraftKings has a stack of that game. If we look back and say, Joe Burrow was just the truth, and Tyrod Taylor is an efficient short passer and they didn't have a deep ball to throw to, Keenan Allen got 12, 14 targets, and then Joe Burrow went nuts, and his pass catching options, AJ Green looked like peak AJ Green. Tyler Boyd was his Justin Jefferson, and this game smashed the over and was one of the best stacks of the week. I think this game at least has that in its range of outcomes, where a game like I said, Jets Bills, I don't see that happening there. I don't see it happening in Jacksonville. So I think this game has a very wide range of outcomes, and maybe that's why you buy into it in DFS. It's going to be low owned, and you get access to a ton of upside for very cheap.
Yeah, excited though I am. There's some tough matchups here for those receiving assets for both teams. I mean, honestly, I think there's William Jackson for the Bengals is going to be on Keenan Allen, and I think there's a couple of good covered corners there that'll be handling things for the Chargers. But we'll see how it plays out. I'm excited too. Honestly, the Joe Burrow thing, you named the captain. Also, as a rookie, big deal. I think that is a big deal. I do. I don't think you see that a lot. So Arizona traveling to San Francisco. Hopefully they will have some kind of breathing gear, because there's a lot of smoke there, people. Arizona, we'll see what DeAndre Hopkins can get done in this offense. He's healthy. Kenyon Drake, healthy and practicing. On the other side of the ball, Deebo Samuel did not practice. Brandon Ayuk still a little beat up. My new buddy Kendrick Bourne, watched him in a fantasy draft last night, was not the best draft ever, although he took himself in the second round, and I think he was pretty pleased with that. Got George Kittle in the third, great value. This offense, Kyle, outside of Samuel, outside of Ayuk, all due respect to Kendrick Bourne, he seems like more of a, kind of a DFS dart toss if the price is right, or am I wrong?
I think he had a good game in the New Orleans game, right? Did he have a good game?
Yeah. He'll score the occasional touchdown.
That's close to a second round pick. And the brilliant strategy is when you take Kendrick Bourne in the second round, that is one pick that pushes George Kittle back to you in the third round. And George Kittle,
apparently
the guy
so.
in this matchup, this is the greatest matchup
right?
for tight ends. And you look at it, George Kittle, this is a team that I think is one of the worst teams against tight ends by fantasy points allowed in the past decade. George Kittle now has no competition, absolutely none. I'm not sure we see Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk coming in at less than 100% at best. And even comically, as a joke, as a bit, this team, they lost J.J. Nelson and Tavon Austin. I don't think they'll have Richie James either.
I think he's going to be ready. I think James is going to be ready.
Richie.
I think he is.
So this is a team that has been, Jalen Hurd, another guy. Unfortunate.
Yeah, no hurt.
Unfortunate. So this is a team that is so incredibly thin, maybe the most thin at receiver, that George Kittle is going to just smash on his targets. I think I know he is the highest priced guy on DraftKings by a wide margin. I think he's like 7,200. But I think you can get some savings in this game, especially if you have DeAndre Hopkins as your number one receiver. It's like 6,900 or 6,800, I believe. Kyler Murray, who I get the matchup is scary. I get it's scary. But we have to hold hands and walk through the fact that Kyler Murray was a top 10 quarterback on the entire week. Both times he faced San Francisco. I think when you see a guy like Kyler Murray with his legs, I think his rushing ability is probably second only to a guy like Lamar Jackson. Maybe you could put Josh Allen in there, and that gives even the best pass rushes fits. That is something that his athleticism is just so hard to contend with no matter who you have in your front seven, and he leveraged that to the best of his ability against San Francisco, keeping his team close against the Super Bowl runner-ups. What happens when you put DeAndre Hopkins into that lineup? I don't know, but I think it's going to be a lot of freaking fantasy points.
They're going to move quickly. Tampa Bay in New Orleans. The Tampa Brady era begins with Mike Evans listed as perhaps day-to-day right now, heading for a game-time decision. What does that do for you?
It's concerning. It is, and what a weird injury. It just came out of nowhere, it seems like. Kind of like the injury that cost Mike Evans the final few games of the season last year, where he limps off to the side, and I'm like, oh, well, he scored a touchdown. All my DFS lineups are good, and I guess he had a fine game. He just comes up limping, and that's it. And now he just appears out of nowhere and to first, we didn't even know what the injury was at first, because Bruce Arians was like, soft tissue. I don't know. He's day-to-day. It doesn't tell you much. We finally find out. For me, Mike Evans, if he ends up being out, Chris Godwin is probably a guy that I have to just at some point eat the chalk with. Obviously, you're playing him no matter what your receiver situation is in season long. And I would just go full in on Chris Godwin, saying we know that when Mike Evans out, Chris Godwin is absolutely going to feast. Maybe the way you get different is you run him back with Brady and you run him back with potentially a guy like Scotty Miller. I'm not super high on Gronk. I just think there's so much downside with a guy coming back after a season off of football in which the year before he didn't look like Gronk. He looked like any other meh tight end. So he's not a guy I'm interested in. But if you're interested in him, I'm sure he'll be relatively low owned in a game that is going to have a lot of chalk. And I think especially in a game where you get to play in one of the best fantasy environments in New Orleans in the Superdome, that is where points are made. So that's probably the scenario where you want to play Gronk, right? Where just touchdowns could fall into his lap, where he could get those red zone scores, even if he isn't like a massive yardage, game-breaking, playmaking guy. He could just score touchdowns. Scotty Miller, though, a guy, young breakout age, high college dominator. He is like
fast.
He is speedy as all hell too. He's a guy who's had a good training camp. I think he would be an awesome, deeper play if you end up having to go there, or if you want to go there in, deep GPPs.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you there. New Orleans side of the ball, Alvin Kamara hoping to get a contract extension at some point this week. Maybe he will, maybe he won't. We just don't know until it happens. I think he's going to play either way. Dallas against the Los Angeles Rams, Sunday Night Football. Boy, everyone seems to be healthy for this one. Darrell Henderson a little beat up, but seems to be trending in the right direction. Talk about Cam Akers opening as the running back 3. You're going to see this a lot. Rookies listed at the bottom of the depth chart. Get used to it. How do you think it actually plays out, Kyle?
Yeah, I think of all of the, on my life, I don't believe J.D. McKissic is, anything other than the starter in name only. J.K. Dobbins, not the starter. Mark Ingram, certainly the starter. Is he behind Justice Hill? I doubt it. Cam Akers is probably the one who I don't believe he is the third running back. I do think he is the one who's most likely to disappoint based on his situation, whereas Antonio Gibson, I just believe he'll get way more carries and targets than any other back. I don't feel as confident about that in Cam Akers. McVay has just gone on. He is taunting fantasy players. He's talking about how much he loves a committee backfield. He sees San Francisco running. It's like, ooh, a committee. And I think he's committed to that. We see them spending high draft capital in back-to-back seasons on running back. Malcolm Brown, a guy who they brought back to this team after I believe Detroit tried to nab his tender or whatever 2 years ago. So, he's a guy who's consistently been a back. He's a coach's loving guy. They give him goal line work. I think we could see Cam Akers between the 20s, some Malcolm Brown in the red zone and goal line, and Darrell Henderson, assuming he's healthy, getting a role as a receiver. He's shifty like that. He profiles as that that small but built, maybe Giovanni Bernard, Duke Johnson type. I am concerned that maybe he still leads the team in carries, but just doesn't get the high value, high leverage touches that we want.
Yeah, that seems like a reasonable approach. So Pittsburgh, we'll move into the Monday night. Pittsburgh at the New York Giants. Boy, I like a lot of players in this game, but not all of them are Daniel Jones, a player who I like, but maybe he's going to get off to a slow start. What are your expectations in general on this one?
Yeah, this is a rough. This is Daniel Jones' first offseason operating, and what a terrible offseason for it to be, operating as the number one quarterback on his team. Doesn't get much of that offseason anyways. Now he faces one of the most talent-laden teams on the defensive front in Pittsburgh. I do think this is a very tough matchup for him. He has an out with his legs. That is sort of the one, that is your parachute ripcord that you get to pull, is maybe he just goes for 30 yards and a touchdown. He breaks off a long 25-yard run, sneaks a few others, gets you to 40 or 50, and he doesn't have to throw more than a touchdown. But I just would not be looking forward to playing him into the Steelers defense. And on the other side, I have been all offseason, and I will continue to just be going headfirst into the Steelers. What we saw last year just should almost not have any bearing on what we believe this Pittsburgh offense will be. From 2018 to 2019, their dip in passing yards per game was the greatest of all time in the NFL. You literally never have seen that before. I think we're going to see them come back to a percentage, a large percentage of what we saw in 2018, where Ben Roethlisberger throws for 5,000 yards. Defense has improved since then. I think James Conner will be healthy. So in that sense, no, I don't predict him to throw for 5,000 yards again, but I do expect him to get Juju Smith-Schuster the ball. And people like Deontay Johnson, I like James Washington. I think one of, if not both of them, could pay off in this week. I'm just all on board with Pittsburgh.
Tennessee Titans at Denver for the late night Monday game. It's a Monday doubleheader, people. They do that the first week of the season. Tennessee King Derrick Henry will be doing his thing. Melvin Gordon and Phillip Lindsay will be doing their thing, but they'll be sharing? Do you have any kind of hunch?
I would think, I mean, we've seen Philip Lindsay over 2 years, a UDFA back who just comes out of nowhere in training camp, ends up, beating out Royce Freeman when Freeman was brought in onto the team. He has defied expectations at every step. What leads us to believe that he won't do it again? Melvin Gordon not getting this super contract. I don't think they're nearly as committed to him as a team like the Jets are to Le'Veon Bell. And I think Philip Lindsay is a more electric splash play making back than Melvin Gordon. Melvin Gordon's only run for over 4 yards per carry, which isn't that special of a mark anyways, once in his career. I just think that, why I'm not interested in Melvin Gordon at his price in drafts and what I'm going to have to pay for him in DFS. I think Philip Lindsay is probably doing enough to make Melvin Gordon a bad play while probably not being a good play on his own.
So I enjoyed so much hearing you opine on each of these matchups that we've gone long. So I'm going to hit you up for your DFS plays. I'm going to ask you for one at each position that you must have in cash, and then we'll do the tournament. Go on the cash.
For me at quarterback, I'm trying to get in Lamar Jackson if I can, but I'll go with Cam Newton for that rushing upside.
That's fair. What about running back?
At running back, Christian McCaffrey, it's a no doubter. I don't think you have to play him in tournaments. You lose a lot of money and a lot of opportunity cost by playing him. But I mean, what are you doing?
In cash, you have to.
Receiver is interesting. I think I might have both a lot of cash and tournament ownership on Davante Adams. I just think he's discount Michael Thomas.
Great matchup.
A big discount Michael Thomas against this once vaunted Viking secondary that is utterly, what are they?
Not
the
so
same
vaunted.
anymore.
Jeff Gladney, Mike Hughes, Holton Hill, meet Davante Adams. It's going to be a long night, kids. Think back to him last year, Kyle, against Philadelphia, the game he was injured. He was, it was almost, we've seen Keenan Allen have that unstoppable game against the Ravens where they just never decided to cover him. They were trying to cover Davante Adams, and it didn't matter. I like this play. Who you got at tight end?
At tight end, I don't have a super strong take on tight end. I will say Chris Herndon. I don't believe Rashad Perriman or Denzel Mims are the answer in week 1. That probably puts Chris Herndon. I'll at least say, because I want Christian McCaffrey, I want Lamar Jackson. Let's dip back in, pay low at tight end, and hope it pays out with Chris Herndon.
This seems reasonable. On the tournament side of things, get freaky on me here. Go.
I won't get too weird, but I do think that you just have to have exposure to the Kyler Murray Arizona offense. I talked about it at length, so I won't belabor the point. But most importantly, Kyler Murray, not too expensive. He's the number 7 price quarterback on DraftKings, and nobody seems to be on him specifically because the Tampa Bay game with the Saints and the Seattle and the Matt Ryan and the Seattle Atlanta game seems to be so popular that I think you're getting a massive ownership discount with a very solid price discount. So that feels to me like I have to get on that.
Who is the running back you can't live without?
At running back, I know I talked at length about how I'm concerned for the long-term outlook for Nick Chubb because of the presence of Kareem Hunt. But I slipped the words.
You like the short term.
I slipped in long term there because I knew I needed to get Nick Chubb in week 1. And it's only a great tournament play. It's actually a very bad cash play. And it's only a great tournament play because I think we're going to see a ton of ownership, obviously, specifically on a Christian McCaffrey, Antonio Gibson build. That's kind of the way you have to play running backs that way because you can't afford to go Christian McCaffrey and Alvin Kamara. So I think you're going to see a lot of CMC Antonio Gibson. I think you're going to see a lot of Alvin Kamara. You're going to see a lot of Dalvin Cook. You will see zero Nick Chubb, despite the fact that this is literally the exact same spot he smashed in last season, going over, I think, 40 DK points, going into Baltimore and just punishing them with his incredible playmaking ability.
Great breakaway. People can forget what a great breakaway threat he is. I know, even though the Browns don't like him, I still do. Suck it, Browns. Wide receiver.
At wide receiver, I've got Kyler Murray. I'm going DeAndre Hopkins. He's priced under $7K. He plays a team that
cheap, huh?
Dude, his price is, I get it. Maybe it's the defensive matchup. He plays a bad matchup for receivers and just for offenses in general, a very stout 49ers defense. But like I said, we saw Kyler Murray put in work against them last year without a guy like DeAndre Hopkins. You add him to the mix, I think the upside's incredible. He's 6,800. He's going to be very low owned. And that's really what I want to look for. I want to look for guys who I know have proven upside. I know we're going to be low owned. And if they're 6,800, just put it in the bank.
There you go. Tight end.
Tight end, if I'm stacking this game, I'm probably fine running it back with George Kittle. I also think maybe a way to get different, though, is to go like Hayden Hurst in Atlanta. I think he'll be under-owned relative to what we see with Calvin Ridley and Julio Jones. He gets a great role to fill in that Austin Hooper role. I don't feel, tight end is a position where I just don't want to eat too much talk, but I do think the way, if you want to go pay up for George Kittle, the way to do it is you have to run it back with the Kyler Murray onslaught.
Look at you go. That's Kyle Dvorchak, people. Schooling you up. So, this is not going to be the normal thing, but it's week 1. The slate is delightful. Kyle was on a roll. I didn't want to stop it. We went through every matchup, and it was fantastic. And we got the DFS plays in. So I'm kind of pleased with all this. I hope you caught Kyle on the DFS live stream with Brady, the new guy.
Yeah, I mean, he was good. I'll rib him for this. We talked in the beginning, and he was like, yeah, Cam Newton's good. And I was like, we're screwed. And then he came out just ripping it off. He came out guns blazing after that. I think we had a slow start, and then he just ripped it off. So definitely check that out and have a good laugh at the first Cam Newton sighting.
Jason Brady, the new guy on the DFS chat, along with Kyle on Wednesday nights. You'll see Jason, I believe, also on Sunday mornings on the live video there. You will not see Kyle there because we got work to do. Everything is available on the site right now. The flash update's up and running. DFS columns by Kyle throughout the week. Justin Lanero, our sidekick here, absent tonight. We'll also be chiming in John Lobb's DFS efforts, the Gridiron's sheet of DraftKings knowledge. A joyous thing. Brad Cruz's hit start. There's tons of stuff. Get on the site. If you haven't seen it yet, go to footballdiehards.com/free trial. And then once you see it, you go, oh my God, why didn't I buy this? And go to the order page and use the promo code diehards to get a 15% discount. Check out the My Fantasy GM tool. Emel's got that up and running, and we'll pull all your roster information in from your various platforms. I'm about to do that tonight because otherwise I'm hosed. I can't fix anything. I got 50 lineups to set. I'm going to be brutalized. So there we have it, kids.
Absolutely. I love it. You know what to do. Find us. Kyle tweets here at Football Die Hard. We'll catch you next week. Maybe Justin comes back. Who knows? Maybe the Mafia cuts off his fingers.
Maybe he loses
come
his
back
fingers.
And find out. Maybe that is the show closer. Come back and find out if Justin has fingers next week.